Well, welcome everyone to our afternoon session on the Financing the Future, Adaptability, Sustainability, and Possibility. My name is Kurt Thurmeyer. I'm a senior research scholar at CGS and also chair of the Public Administration Department. We're really pleased that we have with us some leading experts on financing the future in our state and local governments, especially here in Illinois. We've framed this a bit differently than other panels. I'm going to ask a series of questions, which the panelists all have known ahead of time, and have some prepared answers to those questions. And then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So with us, you've seen in the program in the bio, so I won't go through those, especially since we're running behind now. But we have with us Shane Cavanaugh, Senior Manager of Research for GFOA. Lawrence Massal on the other end of the table is President of the Civic Federation. Jim Norris is the Village Manager for Hoffman Estates. And Mayor Richard Urban, who's the Mayor of the City of Aurora. You know, anybody go to the Paramount Theater? And you always hear that, and the City of Aurora, when they thank you for the sponsorship. So I just had to say that, because I love how they say that all the time. Okay, so what we're going to try and do is tackle this idea of, the financial demands and the conditions under which we think about the financing. So we've tried to approach this from different perspectives, starting with the changing demographics that are affecting the way our cities need to spend money and also their ability to pay. So urban, suburban, and rural communities are experiencing what I call tectonic plate changes, including population losses, demographic changes such as aging boomers, shifting ethnic and racial compositions. One consequence is that the changing demand for affordable housing, affordable and accessible transportation for varied needs, such as getting to and from healthcare services, senior services, and scattered employment opportunities, and so on. So our first question is, what are the implications for the budgets of our local governments as they receive? And are there services that can be eliminated or decreased in order to increase spending on new challenges? So let's start with Shane.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. Is that not on?
No, it is.
No, it is. All right. Very good. Everyone hear me? Good. All right. Thank you, guys. All right. Well, first to answer that question, I'd like to share with you guys some research that GFOA has done recently on the different forms of budgeting that are in use amongst local governments that are GFOA members. And the real takeaway from this slide is near the bottom, where we've got about 9% using priority budgeting, 10% using target-based budgeting, and about 16% using zero-based budgeting. Now, why this is interesting is that all of these are what we might term cut-back budgeting methods, where they are essentially finding services that they can live without and reallocating resources. So, really, I guess, and Kurt, to your point, is that local governments are doing this, and a fairly large chunk of them are doing it right now. We found in our surveys that the number of governments using these types of methods tend to go up during recessions. We are obviously not in a recession right now. So we've got a pretty good amount of them using these types of methods today. One can only assume that these will rise as economic conditions maybe deteriorate. And one other thing I'll share with you on that point is something we've been thinking a bit about at GFOA is if you're going to cut the budget, right? The budget is a competition in many ways. There are winners and there are losers. Now, there's a body of research from the court systems in the field of criminal justice called procedural justice, and the idea being that if a process is perceived as fair, folks will support the decisions that came out of that process, even if those decisions aren't in their self-interest. So I would just like to illustrate that with a quick story from one of our members, Traverse City Area Public Schools. Traverse City Area Public Schools in Michigan has on our slide here declining enrollment, aging facilities, many bad things. All that equals difficult decisions. So what they did is they took GFOA's guidance for school district budgeting, boiled it down to 3 principles that fit their situation. And those 3 principles are education priorities should drive the budget. The budget should not drive educational priorities. So in other words, their past history should not dictate what they do in the future. Number 2, they can't be all things to all people. Democracies often try to do that, school districts especially. And lastly, get the most bang for the buck. So facing difficult decisions. One of those difficult decisions was closing 2 school buildings to free up money to get their math score done. Their math scores are below state average. Very difficult proposition if you're familiar with schools. So they compared that decision to these principles. So the idea being, we fund these 2 school buildings in the past. Does that mean we should continue to fund them going forward? The answer is not necessarily. We can't be all things to all people. So the people in those buildings, meaning the teachers, kids, are not going to love the decision, but can we please everybody? No, we can't. And lastly, most bang for the buck. What's going to get us most bang for the buck and closer to achieving our goal of world-class education? The overhead on 2 underutilized school buildings or a new math curriculum. It's a new math curriculum. So they closed the 2 buildings, and the decision was supported or endorsed by both the Teachers Union and the Chamber of Commerce, 2 groups in Traverse City that rarely agree upon anything. And maybe even more interesting is they have school choice in Michigan, and it was 97% of the kids that went to those 2 schools elected to continue their education with TCAPs at other buildings because they saw that this was a principled decision. It was not a case of, oh, those people in the central office are against us or don't understand or what have you. This was a decision made by principle, and even though we don't like it, we don't love the fact that we see that it's fair and we can respect the outcome. So I think there's a lot of potential for local governments to really be mindful of this procedural justice concept and build it into decision making when looking for services to cut back, et cetera.
I'm going to echo a little bit of what Shane said, but from a little bit of a different focus. My community has used target-based budgeting for the 22 years that I've been there. So we've used it in both good times and in bad, through the recession and before, then after. So part of what I want to talk about the fact is that I think local governments have been dealing with these type of challenges forever. Woodrow Wilson said there is scarcely a single duty of government which was once simple, which is now complex. Said that in 1886. Nothing's changed, folks. Local governments closest to the people, we will rise to the challenge, we will address the issues, but the real question is, how do we do it? Transparency, public involvement, strategic planning. What are the essential services? And that's something that, unfortunately, I believe we are having a harder and harder time conveying or getting from our elected officials. No disrespect it to the mayor sitting to my right. Because public demand coming from a few is not always what is the most essential or frankly the biggest community need. So when I look at the changing diversity in my community, for example, my community is 54% white. It's 8% Hispanic, 4% African American, and 28% Asian. And we've changed significantly and dramatically. The biggest issues that's caused our community is issues related to communication and how that impacts service delivery. So we've had to come up with different ways of communicating, innovative ways of communicating. We've had to engage different community groups to help us with that communication. So I'm not concerned that local government won't respond to the issues and challenges that we face. I'm more concerned that the polarization that we see in the nation may impact the community in a way that the squeaky wheel gets greased and really the most essential community needs aren't being addressed.
Woodrow Wilson quote is one of my favorite quotes there. And I have another one that I like as well. Thomas Jefferson said, "The care of people's lives and their happiness must be the first and only legitimate objective of good government." And in talking about budgets and providing good government and good services to people, we always have to talk about the challenges. Now, Aurora is the second largest city in the state with over 200,000 citizens. And as a matter of fact, we're going through our budgeting process right now, where we look to, where we're hoping to give a completed budget to the city council probably in the next couple of weeks. And I remember having a conversation with my executives saying, look, my priorities for the first 2 years of the administration were public safety, which is a lot more money toward the police to get more police officers. Economic development, bringing more development prosperity to the city, more businesses, more housing, and education. And most times, outside of Chicago and Illinois, cities aren't directly involved in education as they have their own elected body and have their own governing board. However, we all know that the success of school districts and schools are, drive people in and out of the city. Their success is our success. So for the city to be successful, we've got to be directly involved and at least support our school districts. In Aurora, we have about 6 school districts. So then the question becomes, when we're talking about working on our budget, my division heads are saying, I want more police officers, or I want more public works officers, or I want more firemen. When you balance, who do you give credibility to? How do you prioritize? Because I've known, when we're talking about, I've learned, when we're talking about winners and losers in the budget, with our department heads, really, when one of our department heads, for example, our fire department doesn't get what they want, build a new firehouse because we're growing, in such large numbers that we need that fire protection. If he doesn't get what he wants, then the citizens are the losers. Or if the police don't get enough police officers to be able to police our communities, then at the end, our citizens are losers. So when we talk about winners and losers and working on a budget, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out the way we plan, really our citizenry are the losers when we provide services. And when we talk about what services do we cut back, well, if you're a city and you've been providing particular services to a community, to your community members for a number of years, it's hard to take something away. You can't unring the bell. We just have to figure out how to pay for it. And these same citizens that want these services don't want you to raise the taxes. So you got to figure out how to balance all that. And I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, how a city or a local government pays for it in a non-traditional way. And I'll talk a little bit about Aurora and what we're doing with our public-private partnerships and trying to create new streams of income to provide our citizens, continually provide our citizens with the services they've come to rely on and expect from the government without raising their taxes. So, I truly agree with Shane's about, winners and losers, and how you balance and create and make this budget work for your community. But if it doesn't, when we're talking about winners and losers, if it doesn't work out the way you need it to, the citizens are the ones that are the losers.
I think that the greatest challenge facing our state and facing local governments is our loss of population at the state and the local level. And I think it has not been fully absorbed and recognized by many of our public officials. I think there are a lot of reasons for why we've seen a decline in population. It's not clear as to what's driving different parts of the state's loss of population, but what is clear is that we are losing population. In no way were we helped by the state of Illinois going 2 years without a budget. I think that also really plays into what Shane said about if the public believes that the process is fair, the public is going to be more likely to accept the hard outcomes of that process. I think we have a credibility problem in Illinois at many levels of our government, but the fact that we had that ongoing crisis for 2 years at the state level with no budget, I think what we're seeing, the demographic information we have been able to gather, the loss of population in Chicago, the slowing of the birth rate, that had been going on for some time. A lot of it was masked, or at least was covered by a steady immigration growth. But now at the national level, when we don't have that immigration now we're faced with trying to support levels of government with less and less people and needing to provide essential services in order to attract and retain people in the government or in our communities. I think these are very difficult times. I think the confidence level in Illinois, at least as portrayed in the media and talking with people, is pretty low in terms of whether you can have confidence that the process is fair or that the long-term interest. And our state has not been doing a good job. And I couldn't help but think, you know, during the luncheon presentations, how much Northern Illinois contributed to strengthening the processes and the management of local government. At the same time, it was so even implied that some of the process at the state level were deteriorating. So I think there's a real challenge for every level of government, but in particular local government. And I think the two things that I would say is generally the public likes their local government more because they can feel the benefit of what those services are, but that doesn't mean that they're willing to accept inefficiency and a lack of modernization. I think if you look at the struggle that's going on right now in Springfield to come to recognition of why we have 650 local pension funds and try to get them consolidated into something more modern and something more efficient, that challenges sort of the confidence that just what we've done in the past is necessarily the best way forward.
All right, thank you. Second question about the changing demographics and the tectonic plates. What strategies can local governments use to gain support from their residents, especially those who vote in spring municipal elections, for the changes in spending patterns that are necessary for changing demands and new challenges? And the notion about especially those who vote in spring municipal elections is because we know that turnout is really small. It tends to be the property owners, and it tends to be middle and upper income voters. So it's not necessarily representative of the populations at large. So how do local governments get support from the people who actually show up to elect mayors and council members? Let's start with Shane again.
Cool. Well, I'm going to leave the kind of details of elections to my colleagues here on the panel, but what I'd like to talk with you guys about is that handout that you have, hopefully. It's got little pillars on it, that sort of thing. Yep, see you waving around. So this is connected to some research GFOA has been doing the last few years, because we've realized, or I think, not realized, but know that local government financial sustainability is a perennial concern for GFOA members. Our surveys show that we've had a lot of success increasing the adoption of the technical tools like forecasts. Like I think 55% of GFOA members now do long-term operating forecasts of at least 3 to 5 years into the future. That's pretty awesome. About a decade ago, it was like 5%. So this is good. All right. But still, we would be having this panel if this problem was solved, right? So the technical issues will not get us there. So we're thinking about a kind of a new way of conceptualizing this. And the way we're thinking about this can be wrapped up in an economic kind of parable called the tragedy of the commons. If you're not familiar with the tragedy of the commons, it goes a little like this. You've got a commonly owned grazing area. That grazing area is owned by all the farmers who surround it. Because all the farmers own it collectively, each individual farmer has the incentive to send their animal onto that grazing area as much as possible. Because if individual farmer A does not do that, individual farmer B, C, and D will, and individual farmer A's animals are sitting at home doing nothing while the others are getting fat and happy, right? So everyone's doing this, get yours, because if you don't, the next guy will. Over the long term, you end up with that, which is the tragedy of the commons, the grazing area grazed down to nothing. Our premise is that the whole government budget is the commons, right? It is owned by all the departments, all citizens. All constituents are essentially owners of the public budget, and just like the farmers, they have the same incentive, get yours, because if you don't, the next guy will. And the mayor maybe even like kind of highlights some of this, right, when you're talking about different departments trying to compete, and we use that metaphor as competition here. Everyone's trying to get theirs from the budget. Over time, you end up with that, which is the tragedy of the local government budget, right? So fortunately for us, there is a Nobel Prize winning body of work called Common Pool Resource Theory that describes how to solve this problem in the natural world. So over the past few years, GFOA has taken this research, translated it to public finance, and then proved it out using a series of about 25 odd different case studies from across the US of different sizes and type of governments, partnering with a few different major universities to do this research. And the result is what you have in front of you. We call it Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. And just a real quick overview of what this is all about is number one is, first pillar is to have a vision, a shared vision for the community. I think the mayor, you brought up a great point with education, right? So one way to think about local government is very compartmentalized. Another way to think about it is, well, you know what citizens care about? They care about education. So if we as local government are not trying to improve that, even if we're not the school district, we are not really presenting compelling value to people, right? Same thing here. You need a compelling vision that gets people excited. Maybe excitement's too strong a word, but at least willing to support their local government. Next part is trust and open communication. I think Lawrence did a great job bringing that up. Chapman University does a survey every year called the Americans' Greatest Fear surveys. Greatest fear in 2019 was corruption of government officials. Greatest fear for the last 5 years was corruption of government officials. So there's obviously work to be done here, right? In a tragedy of commons situation, I think it's obvious why you would need trust, because if you come to an agreement to sustain the commons, you need to be able to trust your fellow owners that they're going to stick to that agreement. Collective decision making is the third, so getting people involved in decisions, so you can imagine what's going to be more sustainable, a decision that the farmers reach by themselves together or a decision imposed from the outside. Pretty easy call right there, right? So thinking about local government, how we can get people involved in decisions. I think Jim started to bring that up a little bit, getting the public involved. The fourth is to update or have clear rules, so clear rules that govern your system, and lastly, treat people fairly, which we already talked a bit about, so I won't belabor that point. And then, one other slide I just wanted to share with you guys is this little slide here, which is pretty cool. I just discovered this a couple of weeks ago from another field. 6 conditions of system change is what it says there. In this pyramid, you read it from the top to the bottom. And what it tells us is that it's kind of surface level change is policies, practices, resource flows. That's the sort of thing GFOA and I think has done for many years, right? But when you get below that, you get into things like relationships, connections, power dynamics. This is what kind of this model starts to get more into. And then the last at the very bottom, which is transformative change, is a mental model. And a mental model is just a way of looking at the world. And the tragedy of the commons is a way of looking at the world. So at GFOA, we're trying to kind of change people's mental models about local government, that thinking of it in this commons model will help us think about new solutions to bring citizens in and reach financially sustainable solutions. So with that, I'll stop.
We, as I stated earlier, we have 200,000 citizens, over 200,000 citizens in the city of Aurora. And I hope we don't lose any population. I know we're coming up on the census and we're going to put forth a whole lot of efforts to make sure we get everyone counted. Of these 200,000 people, there are about 90,000 that are registered to vote. Of the 90,000 that are registered to vote, only about 15,000, less than 15,000 come out to vote in a mayoral election, even though we know that local politics is what drives everything. It determines what your taxes are, whether you have a number, the appropriate number of police, and if they're a prepared and ready police force and have the resources they need to do a good job, whether your streets are repaired and fixed for your cars you drive down, whether or not your garbage is picked up. It affects so many things, yet people don't necessarily take the time to come out and vote for a mayor. Now, they'll vote for a president, and they'll vote, and the mayor election, of course, is an off-season election. It's a spring election. They'll vote for president, a lot of times even governor. But getting folks to come out and participate in a mayoral election is like pulling teeth. And so the question was, how do you get people engaged and interested, and what makes them want to be involved in local politics, not necessarily just to vote, but to also participate in your community, and just be a responsible citizen or community member to move your community forward. And I think the answer to that is I think you got to do something. You got to get people. You got to as mayor or city manager, you got to do things. You got to get people excited about being citizens of your community. You've got to build things. You've got to, for example, we're redeveloping buildings that have sat in our downtown. These buildings are well over 100 years old. Aurora's a 180-year-old city. We've got some old bones, some old foundation. We have a building that's been sitting empty for 40 years. And all the mayors before me, it just sat there. Now this year, next summer, this year we entered a development agreement with a developer that's going to put high-end market rate apartments on all the 5 floors and retail on the bottom. And they're in the middle of building on it right now, redeveloping it right now. We have another building that's sat empty for 60 years. I mean, the lights have not come on in this building for 60 years. The terminal building, where it used to fix old trains that would come in at the roundhouse. Now that's being redeveloped. It's going to be market rate apartments with retail on the bottom floor. Things like this excite people. But even before we started redeveloping, we would do something simple. We wanted to make our downtown, more walkable, more friendly. Let's plant some flowers. We put up some Italian lights throughout our downtown just to make it look beautiful in the evening. We started doing things and getting people engaged and excited, just talking about what's going on in the city of Aurora. And the more engaged they get, the more I think they're going to want to be involved when we ask them to buy into what we're trying to do. And I don't just do this in a vacuum. I ask our citizens, and I know a lot of times you hear from the citizens, because oftentimes we hear from what I call the vocal minority that believe that they speak for everybody, and they're not necessarily always a happy people. So they don't mind telling you what's on their mind. So it's easy just to kind of close the door and say, hey, I don't want to hear from those people. We're just going to do the best we can. But I like to invite those people. I call it walking in the lion's den. I walk in the lion's den, get them involved, buy in to some extent. You're never going to make everybody happy. Matter of fact, you assume that at least 40% of the people are not going to be happy at most times. But as long as we do the greater good, 60% of the people are happy, telling us what direction to go in. I think we get them engaged. And even those 40% that may not agree with you, because you're doing something, because you're trying to get them involved and engaged, I think they'll want to participate a little bit more. It's been working so far. We'll see when we come up to the next election in 2021. But as far as public involvement, it appears that we've got that by doing something.
So it's interesting because our voter turnout is very similar to what the mayor experiences in Aurora. If you looked at the numbers he mentioned, is about a 7.5% voter turnout. Ours in the most recent election was 4%. I like to delude myself that's because they're amazingly happy with the job I'm doing. But I think the reality is that society, culture, economy play a huge role in that. 40 years ago, you had traditionally single wage earner families. Now, most families are double wage earners. If they want to be involved in their children's lives, that takes more time. So what we see as the atypical suburban resident is a resident that wants quiet, professional, local government, doesn't want to be bothered, doesn't want to read about their city on the front page, but just expects their community to provide the services that they deserve. And I can live with that. On the other hand, when we reach some type of crisis like Mr. Howe talked about this morning, and we are, in my mind, on the runway to a crisis financially because of the state, because of the county, because of, frankly, changing technologies, and I know we're going to get into this question a little bit later on, we are going to have to engage our residents more out of necessity as we look at how we're going to have the revenues we need to provide services in the future. I think, and I know, if I should say, that immigration patterns are also part of this, if you will, apathy. A good portion of our community is also recent Eastern European immigrants. And a little story, my wife is 100% Polish. She was the only one of her family born in the United States. Both of her parents were taken by the Nazis at the beginnings of World War II and put into German work camps. Her mother in a food camp to make farm for the Nazis. My father-in-law in a munitions factory for the Nazis. Ultimately, they met in a refugee camp, got married, had 2 children in that refugee camp, and ultimately were sponsored and came to the United States. They lived in a farmhouse in what was then unincorporated Palatine with 3 other families. When I met my wife and I was introduced to the family, I was referenced as the government man, jokingly and hopefully lovingly, but that was how I was referenced. They became naturalized citizens before that point in time. They never voted in a local, they never voted, period. Local, state, or national election, even though they could. Why? Because the governments that they experienced were corrupt, let them down, never did anything for them. And there was a natural distrust of government. And if you think about many of the people who do immigrate to our communities, they have the same distrust. And I don't know that it's always because of actions of, especially in suburban communities, things that have occurred in our communities, but they read about the state and our governors, and that's where they get it from. So I think the apathy is two things. I think it's change in the economy and the change in family, and I also think it's partially immigration, and I do also think it's because basically most suburban communities are doing a good job.
I think the failure of the state to react and local governments to react to the changing attention span of the voters and the citizens is a big part of the problem. Why do we hold municipal elections in the spring when the weather can be different? Why did we have the biggest election, for the city of Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot, that basically was in the winter, and the campaign was during the winter, and then she gets elected a week before the General Assembly basically takes all this action. It's by design. Might not be by your design, might not be by anyone on this panel's design, but the message that is being sent to people is that their input is not wanted, is not welcome. It's that why is it so difficult to get information in this day and age of technology and adaptation? How many local governments don't stream their meetings? How many, the city of Chicago just started streaming the city council committee meetings, right? That they were always filmed, but they were never publicly shared. There is a lot that can be done to make it easier for the owners of the government to know what's going on in the government, the citizens. I think we also need to recognize that the state of Illinois' control over local governments should be a shared concern over all local governments, because of the waiting game that has been played in terms of addressing the pension liability issue, the waiting game that has been played basically in saying we're going to do a massive tax restructuring, but we're not going to share with the local governments. There's not going to be revenue sharing as there historically has been, should be viewed as a threat on all local government. But the most important, and when you ask what can local governments do, they can speak together and point out the common failures to modernize, the common failures for the state to address the core issues. We are losing population. The census is going to show we've lost population, and we need to have not just our local governments, but the state government that sets a lot of the parameters of how revenue is shared and how it is dispersed, and controls whether things can be modernized or consolidated to react in a much more aggressive way.
I think that one of the things that we're challenged with in terms of engagement also is that we have opportunities that a lot of local governments aren't eager to jump into. And I know GFOA, and I'm working with a group at GFOA that there's new technologies. So there, for example, are now budget simulations that can happen at a local level. And we're actually starting to get research on this, that the level of trust in a local government goes up when citizens have a chance to engage in one of these balanced budgeting simulations. And when they actually, and the other research finding is that when people approach these simulations to balance a local government budget, and they come in with their ideological polarization, after they're finished trying to actually balance a budget, like you have to cut something or you have to raise taxes or whatever to get the thing to balance, the ideological polarization shrinks enormously. And so there are promising technologies, I think, that are on the horizon that can go to speak to some of the things that we're talking about here. The other is that, nattering nabobs have been around for a long time, and they're going to be around for a long time. But one of the things that quite a few local governments are able to do is systematically run citizen surveys, where you ask the average citizen in a scientific way what they think about not only the quality of services, but their willingness to pay taxes. And we're able to see that certain cities, for example, that regularly, say every 3 years, use that kind of technology, which is really not that sophisticated these days. That and if you use those results in your budgets, then you can see some actual changes and increase in support for local government. I always like to use the city of Ames, Iowa, where I was 4 years before I came to NIU. Ames, Iowa has a biennial survey every 2 years, and they ask some important questions that citizens care about, which is, what's the worst intersection in town? What's the most important thing we should fix in the public works budget? And then they take that information, and now when you see them propose the CIP, they adjust the capital improvement plan, and they will say explicitly, survey results said, therefore, we are going to invest in X. And being responsive to the citizens at large, as opposed to the nattering nabobs, is a strategy that a lot of local governments don't embrace. They say it's too expensive. And my argument would be, you can't afford not to ask the regular citizens what they think about, especially when you ask them, are they willing to pay a 1/4-cent sales tax to improve the roads, or a 1/4-cent sales tax to add more police, or whatever it is. When you ask them, then when the nattering nabobs come up to say nobody wants this, you can say, actually 85% of the citizens said they strongly or very strongly support a 1/4-cent sales tax for X. So those are some technologies that I had in mind when I was listening to some of the responses. Okay, I'm not supposed to actually, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and the mayor are bringing up very similar points in some ways, that the elections, are kind of not that important. It's getting people engaged in other ways. Like, and Mayor, you had a great point, which is like getting folks excited about local government. Like, so Brian gave us one of our case studies, San Bernardino County, California, had largest county by landmass in the continental United States, was facing a budget deficit equal to 10% of its discretionary budget, not its total budget, just its discretionary budget. At the same time, the council had just approved salary and pension increases for the employees, right? So that's the very definition of kicking the can down the road. So they realized, all right, things are not going well, we need a new approach here. So they brought in a new manager, and the new manager says, well, you know what we need? We need a vision to get people excited. Why should
the new manager brought in because they kicked the can down the road?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So, get people excited here, right? And one of the things that, how do you get people excited in county government? Well, we need to improve 3rd grade literacy in San Bernardino County, because up to 3rd grade, kids are learning to read. After 3rd grade, they read to learn, right? So the county not in charge of schools though, right? The school district has a problem because they have kids coming to school unable to learn because they're not fed properly, they don't know where they're next, if they're gonna have a roof over their head that evening, that sort of thing. Schools aren't a social service agency, right? But who is? The county government. So by partnering up, the county and the school were able to do some really cool things to improve the district. And this is the best part, get the whole county or the community excited about it in San Bernardino. So they got a whole bunch of nonprofits engaged, like, hey, we want to be part of this plan to improve 3rd grade literacy. One of my favorite stories, they even got the local minor league baseball team involved, because they're like, you know what, that sounds pretty cool. Like, we'd like to have read to your kids at the ballpark day, right? So again, the point of this is not that the minor league baseball team is going to turn things around for you. They had all the nonprofits and others you'd expect that were kind of more on point, but this is a resource multiplier, right? The first question Kurt brought up is well, where is this money going to come from to pay for these services? It could come from other partners, right? So a network form of government where you're getting people excited and bringing resources to the table that are not necessarily available to local government. We've seen this again and again in our case study research, and I think the mayor, your kind of point is right on, that if we can get people excited, it's going to open up whole new possibilities that just weren't there before.
Now, there's a difference between excitement and agitated. So let's turn to the fiscal infrastructure of our communities and an assessment of fiscal sustainability. Urban, suburban, and rural communities continuously complain about the lack of resources to pay the bills for the citizens' residents' demands. Many academic studies point to the misalignment of authorized revenue sources and the 21st century economy. To take one example, we have place-based sales taxes on goods sold in local stores that have missed much of the internet economy, though that is changing a little bit, and the enormous increase in the service economy, for which the sales tax generally doesn't apply. Studies suggest local governments are handicapped by a tax and revenue system designed for the 19th century and not the 21st. So let's talk about revenue sources. First, to the panelists, do you agree with the assessment of the tax and revenue gap for the 21st century economy? And if you do, what are the best options for the state and local government to align the local government revenue structure with the 21st economies, for 21st century economy? Who wants to go first?
I can.
You've got the slides.
All right.
And then we'll go to Lawrence and go
All
back.
right, cool. Or Florence, if you want to go, that's. But all right, so we just did a case study with Region of Peel in Canada. It's right outside Toronto. They're actually taking this problem head on because, in fact, there is a gap. They're feeling it. To give you a good example, they used to be very industry-based, right? But with globalization and such, a lot of their industry is now offshore, so they're now more a transportation hub. Just to give you an idea, and not everyone's so lucky. Not everyone who deindustrializes gets to be a transportation hub, but they are. And so they get to be a transportation hub. That sounds great until you kind of think about that warehouses compared to industry, far less valuable, employ fewer people. So even in the case they're a winner, so to speak, globalization, they're still feeling this massive revenue gap. In fact, they've seen that their reliance on residential property tax has gone up and their reliance on non-residential property tax has gone down. So this is a kind of problem they're feeling acutely. So they're beginning a kind of a movement within Ontario to bring together all the municipalities, and that was brought up on this panel. I think it was maybe Lawrence's point that collective action is very key, right, in a tragedy of the commons situation, which is Ontario and Peel finds itself. So coming together as a provincial group to think about, well, how can we reform the tax system, working with the provincial government to look at new ways of doing revenue. Now, I don't say that they've solved it yet. They're just beginning to embark on this journey, but I think they've done the hard work of defining the problem, right? I think Einstein's report just said if you had 1 hour to save the world, you'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem, 5 minutes solving it. So they've done the hard work of defining the problem, and they've just begun the solution, but I think that model of defining the problem collectively sets the stage for recruiting the allies needed to reach a solution.
I think when you try and get your arms around the structural problems of the revenue base for local governments in the state of Illinois, you have to at least go back to 1970 in the state constitution, which we'll be hearing a lot more about, I assume, with the campaign for the graduated income tax. But my understanding, and when I think back about that, is really that the locals that's why we have so many units of local government in Illinois, is because we didn't have a income tax, and so the best way for local governments to generate revenue was reliance on the property tax. That's, over 50 years, we're approaching 50 years ago, and we haven't revisited. My biggest concern is that the control over so much of what happens in local government fiscal issues is done in Springfield, not in the towns and villages and communities that are the ones asked to raise the property tax or to try to find that. I think the disconnect that we have right now in terms of the state income tax, we're in a crisis at the state level. But at the same time, we're hoping that there's something would be offered to help local governments. And we have mostly a siloed view on how governments operate in Illinois. It shouldn't be that the locals we have to figure it out just for the locals. It should be a comprehensive solution that says what's the broadest tax base, what's the lowest rate that we could apply, and aren't we really all in this together, the state and the local government? That requires modernization, that requires much more efficiency, that requires going to the best practices. I think the fact that right now, as we see the demographic changes in the state, the fact that we have the richest exemption on retirement income in the United States is something that is basically just being glossed over for political purposes and not looking at what's being left behind. The notion that the economy is going to stay strong enough so local governments are going to figure out a way to raise property taxes or raise their sales tax enough to make up for the fact of the pension liabilities that every local government in the state is struggling with is not logical. And so I think it started out, I thought we were going to talk about strategic planning, capital improvement plans, right? Illinois doesn't have those, right? We're operating without those. And no, it's not all Governor Pritzker's fault, and it probably wasn't all Governor Rauner's fault, but we've been decades basically tacking back and forth without really addressing our core structural problems. So the best thing that local governments can do, I believe, is work together to at least articulate the problem and how unrealistic it is to expect that the local property taxpayers are somehow different than the state income taxpayers, and so that we just have one set of taxpayers.
You know, there is absolutely no way we're going to be able to tax our way out of the challenges that local governments have. And, you know, I absolutely agree. We can't rely on the state to assist, our local units of government. As a matter of fact, it seems like the state over the last couple of years has been working against us. You know, they've taken, they've given an administration fee just to give us our own money back. That, the LGDF, they've raised, the percentage that they decide they're going to take of, to balance the state budget. That put a close to $2 million hole in the city of Aurora's budget with both of those measures that the state took. So, they're not and then unfunded mandates that they consistently, create, in Springfield that doesn't take into consideration how that affects the municipality, as well as, our pensions that continue to, liabilities that continue to roll, into a snowball that doesn't seem like it's ever going to melt or stop. So then you have to figure, all right, well, if you're not going to be able to tax your way out of it, because if you do, you're going to drive all your homeowners out of your community. So how do we, continue to provide the services that our citizens have come to rely on? How do we continue to, make sure that we have the adequate number of police and firemen and street workers? Yeah, there's only one way in my estimation, and I talked to it, to improve education, to ensure that you have a safe community, and most importantly, to invite and attract new development, specifically business development, to take some of the burden off of our homeowners. But that doesn't happen overnight. We all know that we're not going to go out and attract the big Amazons every year and bring them in. It's going to add to your tax base and take that burden off the homeowner. So what do you do until then? Well, we've started doing over the last years to get into public-private partnerships. So we go to our private businesses in and around Aurora that may be interested in partnershiping. For example, we're starting to look into monitorizing our assets. Data is the new gold here, in this country. And we've got all these light poles that just happen to be, holding our lights down our streets, lighting our community. And there are companies that will pay money to put small cell towers on these light poles, and cameras on these light poles to collect data. And this data is worth something. And now, since we have rented out or leased our light pole, we're getting income coming in. And this income we can put in the budget to assist with, with our budgetary needs. So in our new partnership that we have with an organization called Smart City Capital, we're looking to raise, now our budget right now is close to $450 million a year, and we could probably use another $100 million easy to continue to provide the services that we need. Now, we're looking to become more efficient and to modernize, but again, that still costs money. How do we do that? This with being able to monitorize our assets and create public-private partnerships, we're going to easily be able to. Our plan is put another $200 million on our budget. If we just continue to do things the same way we've been doing, it's the definition of insanity. To do something the same way over and over again and expect a different result. We know if we continue to raise taxes, we're going to push our citizens out. No one's going to want to be able to live. Matter of fact, we're capitalizing on that because they're doing that in Chicago. So what we're trying to do is capitalize on, the population that's migrating out of Chicago. We want to attract them to Aurora, by creating an urban environment with these public-private partnerships. But if we continue to do things the way we've been doing it and simply, collect taxes and pay bills, it's never going to balance out. So we've got to think outside the box and, be a little bit more creative.
I really agree with Lawrence. That may shock him. I really agree with Lawrence that the root of and I do agree that there is a revenue gap based upon basically the technological changes that have occurred in the last 30 years. So we have a structural issue. The number one issue for the Illinois Municipal League, probably the last 5 years, is the protection of local government revenues and the equal distribution of LGDF as it was originally intended in the 1971 Constitution. Now we hear about Governor Pritzker's, I think he calls it the fair tax plan or something of that nature, but the graduated income tax plan. And when asked whether or not that will, the shares will be turned back to the same percentages, the answer is no, we're going to leave them where they are, but since it's going to collect more taxes, your percentage, your proportion will grow. That's really not comforting to local governments. So even when we do band together collectively, and the number one issue was pensions, the number two issue is LGDF statewide for all the municipalities in the state, we're not getting anywhere because the reality is the state's in such a bad fiscal crisis. There are revenue streams that should be looked at. The state and the federal government, the courts now have moved us where sales tax or internet sales will ultimately, we will get a piece. We're not going to get a piece based upon what actually is occurring in our communities, but it's going to be on a per capita basis back. I guess that's better than nothing. A couple of years ago, we heard that there might be a potential tax on services, sales tax on services. That does occur in many states, and it is one of the things that would be beneficial if it's shared like the regular sales tax with local government. The thing that concerned many of us who are watching these things is that the very first thing that occurred is that two professions were eliminated from being taxed, attorneys and doctors. Guess what the highest percentage of occupation is in the state legislature? Attorneys. It's not doctors, that's right. So we have to continue to fight the good fight. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, two other tectonic plates that are pressuring state and local governments in the second decade of the 21st century are the enormous pension liabilities by negligent state legislature, I can say that, negligent state legislators and governors in the past who refused to levy taxes to pay for the workers who were delivering services at that time. And the second is the global climate change, which is drenching northern Illinois with increasingly heavy rainfalls. Current infrastructure doesn't handle this very well. We got lots of flooding, impassable streets, damage to landscapes. We're going to think here about what changes are needed to our fiscal infrastructure so that we can pay the enormous cost of our sustainable physical infrastructure. And because we're pinched a bit for time, I'm just going to let that linger with you to think about that. We'll come back to that if we have time. But we have two experts on the panel who especially know about pensions. Lawrence, you only have a few minutes. You don't get 2 hours to talk about pensions, sorry. But he is an outstanding expert on our pension issue. And Jim Norris, also, you only get the same amount of time. Both of them have worked extensively on our overwhelming pension issues that are facing us. And the regular taxpayers are scratching their heads. They don't understand how we got here, but more importantly, they don't know how we get out of this. So, Lawrence, let's start with you. How do we get here and how do we get out?
You go back to the basic problem. All roads lead to Springfield. You could watch Mayor Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago, Mayor Emanuel, probably one of the brightest political operatives to hold municipal office in Chicago. Somebody who had been chief of staff to the president and basically had done a lot of work, could not figure out a way to stabilize the city pension funds without going on bended knee down to Springfield to beg then his former partner and now governor of the state of Illinois to allow him to raise property taxes, water fees, and 911 fees, and still basically have to fight the legislature the whole way. The only way we're going to get out of this is if we get serious about a comprehensive solution. It's going to require the state. There is not the tax base to help a community dig out of a multi-million-dollar liability and still continue to provide essential services. The problem, of course, is the state created the mess for local governments based on what they were doing for themselves. So they're in every bit as bad a financial shape. But there is, in the Civic Federation's belief, there is the bandwidth for the state to comprehensively address it. It has to remove some of the unfunded liability from the local governments and basically manage that unfunded liability. The locals should be left with the normal cost. We should adopt basic principles like we do not change state pension benefits for any level of government without an actuarial analysis of what that impact is going to be. Illinois does that routinely. It's threatening to do that next week. The Civic Federation is pushing very hard to see the actuarial analysis for the Tier 2 pension benefit changes for downstate and suburban police and firemen. We haven't seen it yet. It would be a return back to a very bad practice. The pension crisis is just like global warming, right? The solutions, right, in the short term are more painful than ignoring them. But the longer you wait, the bigger the problem gets.
Absolutely every road when it relates to the pension issue goes back to Springfield. I'm not going to really get into the state pension funds, but when we talk about the 650 downstate police and fire pension funds, I've had I'm not sure what adjective or adverb.
Dubious distinction.
I've been part of the tip of the spear dealing with that now for 2 decades. I was part of the 5-person negotiating team on the management side when we got Tier 2 back in 10 years ago. And that's one thing to remember. Tier 2 has only been in effect for 10 years. We haven't even come close to reaching the tipping point on that in terms of number of our firefighter police officers that are in those Tier 2 versus all the ones that we have over time that have been in Tier 1. So it hasn't really dented the fiscal issue at all. But we do know that the consolidation of those pension funds with the increased earnings that they will get because of the size of the investments and the centralized administration and therefore shrinkage of administration costs with the centralization of investment advisor versus 650 funds with different investment advisors, each with different attorneys advising them and charging, that they're savings. I can tell you actuarially for Hoffman Estates, it's a dime to a dollar. For every dime we have to pay for the Tier 2 fixes to deal with the Social Security issues that Tier 2 has, that we didn't do the right way 10 years ago, we get a dollar back in increased investment returns. Hoffman Estates is about $60 million unfunded between the 2 pension funds. Pension liability, as Lauren said, when we had the actuarially run it out to 2029 and beyond, that's actually made up. So there's a couple things that have to be addressed, I think, also by the state. And supposedly, if you read the governor's task force report, that's phase 2. Issues such as amortization, issues about what is the correct funded level. Is it 100%? Is it 90%? Is it 85%? But for those of us that are in local government today, if you're not urging your state legislators to vote on the pension consolidation and vote yes, we're losing a tremendous opportunity. not only on the investment side in terms of the funded level of these funds, but secondly, we're losing out that these new boards, one board for police, one board for fire, actually will have equal representation from management and equal representation from the actual firefighters or the annuitant from the fire, and the same thing on the police side. It's a tremendous opportunity, and if we can't say consolidate, and that's probably one of the biggest things that concerns me, is that this is the first time there's been anything like this offered in the 38 years I've been in this business, and we have communities that are saying, maybe not for me. We got to put the pressure on, and it will be, I know 4 communities that have had their actuaries review it, and every single one came out very close to that dime to a dollar benefit. I'll be happy to share it with you.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And just to be clear, the Civic Federation strongly supports consolidation. Our concern about this, which was a task force to focus on consolidation, it didn't include Chicago, and it didn't basically go after the management of the benefits. Well, it just goes after the management of the benefits, not the, the management of the investments, I'm sorry, not the management of the benefits. So yeah, we support consolidation. We want to see the actuarial analysis as to what the cost of the Tier 2 changes. There is a significant concern about whether we would ever hit safe harbor concerns for these funds.
Well, Mayor Irvin, you do face pressure from voters about all this, and could you share on the elected officials' side, how do you guys think about this issue in Aurora, and especially the politics of getting people to pay for pensions?
You know, truthfully, I don't believe our average citizen understands how pensions work and the liability that it is to our budget. They simply see that we're in debt. So, you know, it's hard to explain and justify. However, you know, I agree with both these gentlemen. We've got to, stay on our state reps. You know, stay in Springfield, consistently lobbying for change to happen. Because, as I've said before, if we keep going in the direction we're going in, it's all going to implode on itself. We can't keep doing the same thing the same way we've been doing and expect a different result. And why our legislature doesn't want to take this issue up and deal with it, I have no idea.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. So I'd like to build off the mayor's comments. I thought he made some interesting points there with, about like kind of getting people like to want to do this, right? And so we've got our little model there, the 5 pillars, and some of the things that we've seen nationally across the country where local governments have been successful in paying down these kind of liabilities is that number 1 starts with a vision that this is a goal worth doing, and how people have done that. They've reframed the problem, right? So like one particularly clever city started describing it as bad debt and kind of likened it to like a credit card bill or a house you've overbought, or maybe a degree where you've got student loans for it and the degree is not providing sufficient value. Everyone gets from their personal life, like that is a bad thing, you want to pay that off. Also opportunity costs, like a really key way of thinking about it in our success cases is they've thought, well, we've got this annual payment that we make to the pensions, it's growing every year. What could we be doing with that money if we weren't paying it to pensions, right? What are the teachers we could be hiring, the police officers, whatever it is your community wants? What is the opportunity cost of these payments these increasing payments you're making? So that's a kind of a way to get people thinking about this in a new and different way. And then kind of the third point with collective decision making is having a clear policy, including a goal for repayment. And then going into clear rules is having a payment schedule like you do for debt. So you have like San Bernardino County, just to use them, we've met them earlier. They had these big liabilities and they created a payment schedule just like they had for debt. And they'd use every year, they'd find some money like through like maybe their conservative budgeting forecast, one-time revenues to put a little bit towards that. And the elected officials ultimately got really excited about seeing this payment schedule met every year because it's basic human nature. You've got a goal. You like to see the goal being achieved, right? So you set the goal, goal's achieved, people feel good, they want to keep doing it. And then lastly is treat everyone fairly. We've seen a lot of success with folks really thinking about this concept of intergenerational equity. In other words, this is not something we want to leave for our children. So really bringing that into the conversation and making it real has helped our success cases at least really think hard about the need to do this sort of thing. Maybe one final thought. I just learned this, I got an email earlier today. One of the first, I think maybe the first bond in the country where resiliency and climate change strategy materially impacted the rating. Just got issued, to your point, Kurt, about like, you know, what sort of institutions might need to change. Well, bond ratings apparently just have changed, so that people are now looking into your climate strategy as an explicit criteria for your bond rating. So more to come on that. And I just got one email about it earlier today, but apparently that's the thing that's happening.
Excellent. Okay, well, we do have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So, anybody want to ask a question? Yes, sir.
We keep on talking about civic engagement, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, kind of saying it doesn't really seem like public yet. It's kind of a pension debt. I guess that's one of the things as I look at strategies of, you know, how can we build for the future and have sustainable communities. How do you do civic engagement on long-term debt? I mean, it sounds like, Shane, you spoke of some places that kind of did it successfully. Is it worth trying, or is civic engagement for what the future will be and you build towards it?
Sure. Yeah.
What I should spend my time.
I mean, I think I go back to what the mayor said earlier, is getting people excited is a key, right? So I wouldn't say you'd want an engagement about long-term debt. That would be very boring, right? And citizens would probably not want to be part of that. But if you did have engagement like around, like say, getting kids to read or other things that do get the community excited, the next question then becomes, well, how do we pay for that? How do we do that, right? And that then kind of opens the door to some of these other conversations, and what are those opportunity costs? What are we giving up? And is that to say that the citizens are going to become debt experts? You know, no, but it's kind of, you're getting to get them thinking about what are the resources necessary and say, you want those kids to read, we need to start creating wraparound services for the schools. Where does that money come from? You know, then people start getting into this conversation, becoming interested in being part of the solution. So I lead with that, you know, things that get people excited and not leading with, you know, the technical stuff, because that is probably not the honey they're looking for.
Yeah, Lawrence.
I would build on that, but in a little different way. I think in order to get the public engaged in debt and finance, you have to make sure your public officials are comfortable enough conversing about debt in the finances. And so taking enough time, whether it's in a subcommittee or it's in a special meeting or hearing, so that the officials can ask the staff, or the staff can just in open demonstrate the main issues that the public can also absorb at the same time. I find, and I don't want to pick on any of the governments that we monitor, but it's sometimes surprising how limited the attention span of not just the public, but the public officials for talking about the debt and what the consequences are, or what the implications are for dedicating certain revenues versus others.
So as a nonprofit, really focused especially on Chicago, but what kinds of educational events or engagements does Civic Federation do along that lines to try and educate or make comfortable elected officials or the public?
So for the state of Illinois and for the local governments, the major local governments in Chicago, the city of Chicago, Chicago Public Schools, the county government, we analyze the budget and do a long form analysis. All of our reports are available online, and I think I think that's the other thing. The immediacy of a committee hearing or of a council meeting is, there's some attention, but if it's on the internet, if it's basically gets picked up in any form by any news outlet or any of our reports, then it takes on a life that's much longer and bigger. So having your information available and transparent can only help the public's understanding.
Yeah. Jim?
I don't really have anything to add to that. I think, first of all, trying to do anything on debt and how complicated it is will have many people's eyes just crossing over. I know at least in often states when we present something to our finance committee of the board, they ask me to talk about, and the finance director to talk about the different forms of debt, ranging from obviously GO bonds, revenue bonds, so forth, what it means, what full faith and credit means. So they want us to try to do primer on what debt means and then how it impacts our overall debt. And our meetings are telecast live, so we know hopefully we're not talking just to the 15, 20 people that might be in the room, but I sympathize and empathize with your question, because I'm not sure that gets us anywhere unless we have other revenues that we could. You're going to have to pay the debt one way or the other, right? And so you're either refinancing at a lower rate to get a savings, or you're extending the amortization. Politically, extending the amortization is always a huge negative. So what are your other options? And maybe I'm asking this of Shane more than anybody else, but if you're trying to do long-term fiscal planning without just saying, when is our debt going to fall off? I'm not sure how you get anywhere. That's just me.
We have one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I don't believe that there's been any discussion in terms of the number of units of local government and taxing bodies that we have. There was an international study that documents that Northern Illinois has more units of local government in the metropolitan area around Chicago than any other metro area below.
The state of Illinois has more than any other state in the country.
Right, but for metro areas, what are the names of the place in the world? Paris was half, because they thought they had,
Okay.
and then they found out Chicago actually.
We're number one.
The reason why you don't hear anybody at this panel identifying the 6,978 units of local government that we think the state of Illinois has is because there is no place, and I testified about 2 weeks ago before the property tax reform committee that is made up over 100 members of the General Assembly, so you would think, now there's a body that has the ability to do something. But we don't know how many units of local government in the state of Illinois. The state comptroller has a list of local governments that doesn't match up with the U.S. Census of Government list. And so that has been an emphasis for the Civic Federation that we are going to release a report in a couple of weeks about what our calculation for the number of units of government and identifying where they're located and who is the point of authority for them. But our hope is that the state of Illinois, the first step to fixing a problem is to recognize you have a problem and not recognizing how many exactly. You should be able to know exactly how many units of government rather than a range.
Yeah.
But to the point,
Question?
so quickly, in fact, by the way, Lawrence, it was the 1870 Constitution that created the problem, not the 1970, just didn't fix the 1970 Constitution. The 1870 Constitution provided that there was a limit on how much debt the unit of government could incur, and what it did was to cap that. Around the problem, you created another unit of government, another taxing body. So this is a legacy of 150 years. But to me, the real issue is that it also includes political engagement. Because for every one of those units of government, you have an election. And I once had a map drawn that showed the jurisdictional lines in Cook County. And it obliterated the underlying map because it had so many crossing lines. How anybody knows who they're elected, who they're electing, what the accountability of that person is to the public is impossible to know. So this idea of sort of local control, I think is in effect denies people local control because there's no practical way for participation. But we have local government representatives. The biggest impediment in doing this has been from local governments themselves. They don't want to consolidate. How do you get past that?
You let a state legislator pass a law that says now we're going to do it.
Or you consolidate what you can, which is the point I think Jim was making.
Right.
Let's do these police and fire, longest journey starts with the first step, and we've been waiting to take a first step for a long time.
The issue of consolidation of units of government has been around. I can remember Jim Banovitz teaching me scope and dynamics in 1981 and talking about the potential future consolidation of townships. Bills have been introduced, they've gone nowhere. There's got to be political wherewithal at the state level to enable these things to happen. There was a slight step post-recession when they started talking about consolidation of dispatch centers. And that has happened to some degree, mostly in the suburban area and some downstate counties as well. There are too many branches of local government now. For those are still in the MPA program, those are a good source of jobs, but you know, we really don't need what we have. In fact, it creates confusion and disjointed services.
So
Can I just add two quick things that I wanted to make before I left? Number one, for the students, this is the best place in the world to study public administration because we have the most units of government, so that's a good thing. But what the center can do and what the university, I believe, can do more of is really point out what best practices are. There is not enough information about how uniquely different Illinois is in its approach to government, to finance, to the numbers of government. And this institution could play a bigger role than it already has in raising people's awareness and letting them know that there is a different way to proceed than we have.
So,
Lawrence,
as the guy who teaches the introductory public administration course here for NIU, I can tell you I absolutely do teach that in one of the first two classes that are there. How many units of local government, why it doesn't work, why it needs to change, and how it impacts us fiscally.
I was trying to promote the idea that the university can publicize that more rather than just tell the students, telling the general public.
Well, and I will be talking to you about that. So one of the things that I've actually been trying to shop around is that NIU and with the center and their School of Public Global Affairs, I'm trying to offer the services of the university to do the first comprehensive study of township governments, not how to consolidate them, but the problem is people say, well, we have to get rid of township governments. Problem is, somebody has to want the stuff that the townships do. And when you ask county governments, do you want to take care of cemeteries? They say no. When you ask the municipal governments, they're not interested in some of these things. So the question is, one, what happens to the stuff that the townships do? Because it's not like they stop doing it. The second question is, how do we deal with the range of township governments that we have? We have township governments that do virtually nothing, say DeKalb Township, where I live, which takes care of replacing cemetery stones, has about 100 miles of roads, and hands out checks to about 19 people for indigent care. Then we have Hanover Township that has, lots of social services, state-of-the-art facilities on. You have the Schaumburg Library, Township Library, which is a magnificent kind of facility. So when you say townships, the problem is you say it's a layer of government. The issue is, and it gets back to what Mary Ober said, those are services that somebody is receiving. And the question is, do you want to get rid of those services? Fine. But if you don't, who's going to do that work? And how much money do you actually expect to save? And the answer, which my students in budgeting know is, it depends. It depends on what the services are and who's going to take them over. So I'm gonna look for an endorsement letter from the Civic Federation for that study, because the first step is to actually say to the legislature,
all you have to do is pull the study from Lake County. They went in their modernization study, and they identified how you can transfer those responsibilities. We don't need to know exactly who is going to take it to know it's inefficient. So I don't think we need a study of all the townships. We need the political will, and there has been some in Springfield, to allow the voters to eliminate their townships and to make it less difficult for them.
I would keep debating this, but everybody's going like this, so they want a break. So let's thank our panelists very much.